This episode of the Fundamentals of Carp Fishing in conjunction with JRC focuses on carp care, arguably the most important facet of your entire carp angling approach, and certainly the most important of the films that we've brought to you in this Fundamentals series. So we're going to look at all of the do's, all of the don'ts, all of the things to remember to make sure that the carp you catch go back into the lake in just as good a condition as when you hooked them. Now, before we get into the bones of actually how to deal with a carp from the netting all the way through the entire process of release, let's look at the essential items that you must have, a checklist of all the things that if you're going carp fishing, you need to have in order to be able to deal with the carp safely and effectively. So first of those is obviously a good quality landing net. Ideally, your landing net wants to be lightweight because big heavy landing nets are a problem with trying to net carp when you're on your own. So try and get the lightest and strongest one that you can afford. This is a JRC X-Lite. It's got a green mesh. I find the green mesh much better than black mesh is, because if you try and net a fish in very clear water with a big billowy black mesh, the carp can at the last moment spook away from it, and if you've not got the best of hook holds, that can be the moment you lose the fish. So stack everything in your favour. Get a green mesh if you can. All the meshes on the market from the leading reputable manufacturers these days are lovely and soft, and of course without any knots, and they're designed just to really take care of the carp once it's in the bottom of there. Soft mesh with small holes. And while we're on the subject of nets, very, very important thing to point out: if you've been using a net for a while and it's developed holes through wear and tear, maybe you've had to cut where you've hooked the mesh, or you've had to cut a hook out, or anything at all that's resulted in a hole, then you need to take care of that, either by stitching it together or replacing the mesh. Now, a little interesting fact, a landing net mesh is one of very, very few things in the world that you can make a hole in it that's a bigger hole and it's got less holes than what it started with. Someone told me that once. So, soft mesh, 42-inch arms, very, very important. You want a nice big yield, a big spread across that for netting carp will make your life a lot easier. So soft mesh, preferably green, lightweight and strong, 42-inch arms. That ticks all of the boxes with my JRC net there. A water bucket. These aren't in any necessary order. A water bucket for keeping the fish wet is not only beneficial for the fish itself to keep it wet for obvious reasons, but also will make the fish look a lot nicer in your photographs. This one's been chewed by a mouse. Luckily it was high up enough that I could still use it. If it had done me down there at the bottom, I'd have to get a new one. But I like this. I've been using this for a few years now. It's my lucky water bucket. So make sure you've got a receptacle of some kind for keeping the fish wet. Scales, an essential item, but not essential. You could still go fishing and catch carp and process them quite well without weighing them, but most carp anglers, I think it's fair to say, do want to record the weight of the fish they've caught. I'm going to get on to the correct usage of scales later on, but these are JRC scales in conjunction with Reuben Heaton. Reuben Heaton have got a long-standing reputation for making the best angling scales that are out there, so very, very important item. Next up is this guy, the Carp Care Kit. If you don't carry a Carp Care Kit of some description, then please make sure you get one. A lot of good responsible fisheries demand it as even, you know, to gain access to the fishery or to get membership, you have to show that you own a Carp Care Kit, and that's very good responsible management. There's loads of different types on the market. This one is, as you can see, the labels come off there where it's just been kept in storage with my mat and my sling and it's got a bit wet. But there's loads of different ones. Just they're all going to do a good job of sterilising any kind of wound or lesion and cleaning it off. So get whichever you think is going to be best for you and the fish you're dealing with. I think this is a Christen Clinic one, which is one of the original carp care kits, probably the first one on the market actually. So I've still got a few bottles of this, and I keep those at hand at all times. Again, with carp care, it's not just about treating the mouth, you know. Generally speaking, certainly the fisheries that I've been going to that stipulate barbless rules, I'm very much for that now on busy day ticket waters, and you don't get any kind of mark usually. If the hook has slipped at all, which again is rare but can be more of an attribute with curved shanked hooks, which I don't like in my own angling anyway for that reason. But if the hook has torn a little bit, then treat it straight away with your carp care kit. But over and above that, guys, just give the fish a good check over. I always like to remove parasites. If I see any leeches on the body of the fish, I'll take those off. Argulus are another kind of parasite. They're very small circular type ones. They're kind of lice. Again, I'll try and wipe those away or chase them away with a bit of carp care kit, which is very astringent, and they won't like that on them at all. If the fish have any kind of lesion, scratches, tears, split fins or anything from spawning, you know, they go through the rigors of that and they can really get marked up. Anything at all that needs treating, I'll give it a little bit of a sterilisation. It's the very least we can do before we get the fish back to treat them with complete and utmost respect. After you land in there, I think probably the most important piece of kit, essential, absolutely essential for every carp angler. Not just a carp angler, if you're fishing for big fish of any species, you need a good, well-padded unhooking mat. I see people cut corners with mats all the time. Not cut corners off their mats, but cut corners with the quality of their mats. Sometimes you walk into someone's swim and the unhooking mat resembles little more than a tea bag in terms of padding and little better than a tea bag in terms of size. You've got to remember, guys, that, you know, even if it's a mid-double carp, which is still a good sized carp, but a fish of that size, you know, if you've got a mat that's only that big and you're trying to put a carp that big on it, you haven't got much margin for error. So it is every carp angler's responsibility to carry a large and well padded unhooking mat. I really can't emphasize that enough. This is a JRC Defender mat. This mat hasn't got sides. I'm pretty well accomplished at dealing with carp on the mat, but I would say that if you're new to carp fishing, it is a good idea to get a mat that's got sides. I don't tend to favour the cradle type, which have the metal rims running around. I think they can be problematic, but a soft, well padded mat with soft sides will really help you out, particularly during the summer months, maybe post spawning, when the carp can be really, really lively indeed. So if you're looking to get a new mat, get a soft, well padded mat with sides. JRC do some really, really good ones at the top end of their range. And for general carp fishing, you know, a JRC Defender mat like this is adequate. So the last item that we have is the weigh sling. Again, something we're going to get into in great, well, actually, let's get into it now. They're commonly referred to as retainer slings, and I think that in itself, that labelling has caused a few problems, because anglers put fish in retainer slings and very often leave them in there for inordinate amounts of time. Now, quite often on social media, you'll see shots of fish in slings, and usually at first light, where someone's waited for it to get light, with some kind of tagline like 1 or 2 fish waiting in the cells or something clever like that. Now, when it comes to nighttime photography, you all have a responsibility to the carp to get the fish back in the water. Now, if I've caught one and it's close to dawn and it's like half an hour or maybe an hour at most till I'm going to have good light, then I might consider retaining one if it's a notable capture. But generally speaking, and if you look through any of my social media feeds, you'll see them littered with night shots. I think it's really important to be able to do good quality pictures of the fish. Well, that's actually down on you. The quality is down to the individual, but to be able to do pictures of the fish and then get it back in the lake in a respectable amount of time. I had a couple of really good fish this week where I've been out filming and caught those fish at midnight, 1 AM, had one at 2 AM. They were all weighed, photographed and returned. None of this putting them in a sling and then keeping them for hours on end is not acceptable. The fish will find it stressful for periods of time, and of course the longer they're in there, then the more lively they're going to be when you get them out. So don't think of them as retainer slings. I think of them as weighing slings principally, because that's what they are. They're a weighing sling fitted with flotation devices. So think of it as something you put the fish into for a short amount of time as possible. So I might do it, so I think of the times I've done it recently. Once there was an absolute cloud burst recently, about the only rain we've had all summer, but I just netted a fish and the heavens opened. couldn't actually do anything, certainly in photography terms, while that was coming down. So I slipped the fish into a retainer, staked it out securely, waited 20 minutes till the weather passed, and then I did everything. Another situation might be that, you know, it's just about to get light, literally about to get light, or it's just getting light and you need a bit better light to do your photography. I would say that's acceptable. So there are a couple of examples. What you don't want to be doing is breaking any of what I call rules of usage. Now, first of all, you don't want to be staking them out in shallow water, and you don't want them in the full face of the sun for any long period of time. If it is really bright and the sun's beating down on it, then obviously I'll keep the time to an absolute minimum, and I might lay the landing net on top of it as another shield. But the fish is in cool water, you know, so, but be mindful that in the height of the season, when the weed is up, the sun's bright, and the oxygen levels in the water will be at their lowest, that's when you can get problems with retention. And again, the last thing that any of us wants on our hands is a fish that's not recovered because you've held it too long and it's died as a result. That can happen, and you really need to make sure you get these fish back as quickly as possible. So we're going to go through in theoretical terms how to use this properly shortly, but that completes the list. We've got mat, weigh sling, good quality landing net, water bucket, and a set of scales. That's your checklist. Now we're going to go through theoretically, I haven't caught one today, so we're going to go through theoretically how to use each item and make sure we're getting the very best out of them. Now we were going to film this carp care section on a runs water, in inverted commas, where we could hopefully have caught a fish or two and done the whole process live. Unfortunately, due to water levels in this area, that particular lake and a couple of others in the area have been shut. The water now is so low on some of those lakes, they've been shut just to give the fish a break and to make sure everything's in good order. So we've had to come onto the big lake at Suffolk Water Park. We're literally here just for a few hours. I've got 2 rods out. The chances of a fish are looking a bit slim now. It's the middle of the day, and we haven't got much time left till we've got to shoot off. So what we're going to do is, for everything that I'm going to reference, we're going to use some archive footage, which we've got loads of, showing exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go through it again, talking about how to make sure that you're doing everything right and avoiding those pitfalls and dangers which could be detrimental to the carp. Of course, it all starts with the landing net and with the netting of the fish. Once you've got the fish in the net, it's important to secure the net. Now, there's a number of ways you can do that. One of my favourites is to stick a bivvy peg into the ground over the handle. It depends also on where you are in terms of height. So if you're on an elevated swim that's just off the water, then very often the net pole can run off the front of the swim, and with a peg securing the back edge of the pole, pushed down tight, it makes sure that it can't go anywhere. If you're down at water level itself, then a couple of storm poles on the front corners of the net to keep it up and elevated work very, very well. And if the bank's soft and sludgy, I like to jam the pole in before I put those sticks on the front, and then you've got a real rock solid system for short-term retention. Very often, if I am getting things sorted out, I won't use the retainer at all. That is solely used for its original designated purpose, which is just weighing the fish. Perfectly safe and acceptable to retain a fish in a landing net. They've got very good oxygen exchange. Just make sure that, as I said, it's fully secured using bank sticks and or a peg at the back end. And then once your fish is secured, I like to get myself organised. So usually I'm a bit overexcited and I need to just calm down for a minute and think what I'm going to do and the order of things that I'm going to do them in. Now, the whole process of dealing with a fish is made a lot easier if you can get in the water next to the fish. Now, although some places do ban wading, I don't think any of them ban you getting into the margins just to deal with a fish safely and effectively. Obviously, some lakes might drop off to 10 foot off the front of the board, so don't do it there. Not unless you're as tall as my mate John. But anyway, if you can get into the water, the whole process is a lot easier. So usually the first thing I'll do, having got the fish in the net, before staking it out, normally I will bring the front draw cord backwards over the thing, over the fish, so that the fish is down there at the front of the mesh and the draw cord and the weight of the net is just temporarily securing him. I will then go and get my chest waders on, maybe a couple of storm poles and a peg, and I'll come and get everything organised. Once you're in the water, it is so much easier to deal with. Having got everything secured, I'm in the water with the fish, I'm in the chesties or welly boots maybe if it's shallow, but don't drag the fish onto really shallow ground where it could get injured. The next thing that I like to do is remove the rig, or preferably the hook as well, from the fish. Now, if you're not experienced, removing the hook while the fish is in the water might prove tricky. If you're experienced, then it's quite a simple process, and I do like to get that whole rig, the line, the attachment to obviously the rod that we've caught the fish on, out of the game, out of the way. If you're not comfortable with unhooking the fish and you're using a quick link system on your rig, which I do advocate, unclip that part and get rid of the rod and the line. You don't want to be trying to, particularly if you're on your own, trying to carry a rod, a reel, the line, the fish, the net, the whole thing. So get rid of that if you can. If you're not using a quick change thing, just cut the hook link and get rid of it. The next thing to check is that your hook is not coming through the mouth of the fish where it could stick out the other side and then get caught on the mesh of the landing net. That's really important. Additionally, if you've got any little micro swivels or anything attached to the hook or the hook shank, make sure that none of those can get caught in the mesh when you move the fish. That's really, really important. Again, I do prefer to get the whole hook and the hook link out the way, but if you can't do that, then just make sure they can't get caught in the mesh. Now, having done that, we need to get the fish out of the water and onto the mat where we're going to weigh it, photograph it, and then deal with it. So the very next thing that we need to do is look at how we're going to transport the fish from where it's in the landing net onto the bank. Now, before we can even think about extracting the fish from the water, it's imperative to have everything ready on the bank that we need. Have it close to hand and have it prepared. First of all, the mat. The mat needs to be in a good position, and by that I mean it needs to be sensibly placed so that hopefully, preferably, it's not far from where the fish is. We don't want to be carrying a fish a long distance if we can help it, but also ideally on a very level piece of ground. Trying to handle a lively carp on a mat, on a slope, is very, very difficult, even for the most experienced of anglers. So if you can, get your mat not too far back and on a flat level piece of ground. The next thing to do is fill up our water bucket, put it by the mat, make sure that that is close to hand, and then we're going to get our weigh sling. Now, this is a thing that a lot of people struggle with, is accurately recording the weight of your fish. Now, we're going to use the weigh sling to extract the fish from the water, which I'm going to come on to very, very shortly. But once the fish is in that sling, we don't want to be taking it out to zero it, or even worse than that, or just as bad, we don't want to be weighing the fish with it and then trying to work out what the sling weighed and then subtracting it. Absolute rubbish. What you want to do is get your sling at this point. We've got the mat ready, the bucket of water's ready, the fish is safely retained. Get your sling, go down to the edge of the lake and give your sling a good thorough soaking. Drain the water out of it, come back up to your swim and hang it on your scales. Now, all scales will have a tare function, which is where you can zero it. Make sure the water's run out of your sling, if you want to be honest, like all carp anglers should be, and we're weighing a load of water in there. So we want an accurate weight of our fish if we're going to weigh it. So the tare function is just very simply the button that allows you to zero whatever you've got on there. So with the weigh sling hanging on there, I'll just zero the sling, which means that once the fish is in there, we're going to get a true reading of just the fish. Very important. Having done that, we're now at a stage where we can think about the photography of the fish. This is completely down to the individual. You might have someone with you with a camera who knows what they're doing, or you may be setting up for self-takes, but whatever you're doing, make sure you have your camera and it's set up properly, ready to go before you get the fish out. You do not want to be fannying around with a fish on the mat trying to set up a camera properly. All of these things should be done in advance of getting the fish out of the water. That is the key point I'm trying to get across. Preparation. Everything should be ready and able to deal with the fish as soon as you bring it out of the water, so everything is done in as short a time as possible and as smoothly as possible. You need to think about things like background, where you've placed your mat for the photography. You know, have you got a big white van immediately behind you? Not ideal. or your bivvy doorway. You know, if you can, turn the mat and position it. Again, if you can, think about this from the very beginning. You want your mat close to where the fish is, on a flat bit of ground and with a nice background. You do all that in one go and you haven't got to worry about it after that. So think about that. It's just about preparation and making sure that everything is ready to deal with the fish as soon as we get it out. So everything's ready, the scales are zeroed, the mat's ready, the bucket of water's ready, the sling is wet, the camera's ready, and all we need now is to get the fish out of the water safely. Now this is really, really, really important. My preference is to take the sling down to the water and collapse the landing net with the fish in it inside the sling. So I collapse everything, fish is in the net, we've removed the tackle, as I said earlier, and all I'm going to do is disconnect the net and collapse that down. Now, what you don't ever want to be doing, guys, really important, this is a common pitfall, people will dismantle the net and it's still attached to the rod and they will roll the mesh and the fishing line down and then lift the fish. Now that's a point that really can cause accidents because the line is rolled tight, and if you lift the fish, it can sag in the bottom of the net and that can cause a lot of damage. So again, that's another reason why I like the tackle out of the way completely. Disconnect the arms, then you can roll the mesh down because there's no line, and then you can slide the fish over the sling, into the sling, zip the sling up, and then you can transport the fish. Now the reason for doing this, really important. If you try and carry a fish, particularly a heavy fish over 20 pounds, to a mat in a mesh, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. If for any reason you haven't been able to remove the hook, the fish could flap, the hook could stick through and get caught in the mesh where it could tear. You've got all the issues with the fins. You've got serrated fins on the leading ray of the dorsal fin and on the anal fin. They're very sharp, they can get caught. You've got tails that can get damaged. All sorts of things. I just think of it like when a fish is in a landing net and it's heavy and you're carrying it and it's tight, stretched across it's like the mask on a bank robber, with a stocking face. It's not an attractive thing to look at. It doesn't do the fish any favours at all. So by collapsing the net into a sling, we're taking all of that stress, all of that mesh that's tight around the fish's body, we're taking that out of the equation. That's in the bottom of the sling, and we're going to carry the sling. It's a lot kinder to the fish, and it's something I've been a strong advocate for now for a good 15 years. So we're going to collapse that into the sling. We've got the fish in the sling, zip it up, and then we're going to make sure the fins on the body of the fish before we lift it, before we zip it, we're just going to make sure the fins are flat along the body. Then we're going to zip it, lift it and carry it to the mat. Now the fins are very, very important. Obviously a hugely important part of the fish's anatomy. We don't want to be bending tails, God forbid snapping tails, and we don't want to be bending pectoral fins, the forward leading fins. We don't want to be bending those forward where they could potentially snap. So very important when we're handling the fish, not just in getting it out of the water and carrying it to the mat, but when it's on the mat as well, to make sure the fins, the pectoral fins, the front ones, are lying flush along the body. It's something you see a lot where people have taken a picture of a fish on the mat and its fin is bent forward underneath it. Not good at all, particularly if that fish then flaps. You wouldn't want to imagine what could happen. So we've carried the fish to the mat. This is another thing. You see a lot of people, they get to the mat, plonk. No, this fish is now out of the water. Remember, a carp, when it's in the lake, is supported by the water column. It's virtually weightless, even if it's a 30, 40 pound, it's a really big fish, it's virtually weightless in the water. As soon as you take it out, it's subject to density. Some people call it gravity, but density means that then everything changes. The dynamic is completely different. There's a lot more stress on the body of the fish and things are different, and it's your responsibility to make sure that no harm comes to them. So put them down gently on your well-padded mat, and then you're ready to have a look at your prize. Unzip the sling. The next thing is to remove the mesh from the equation. I like to get the mesh completely out of the way. So I like to slide it along the body so that then it's just come in with the fins, they're all pointing backwards, and the mesh is slid out that way so it exits off the tail of the fish. That's the best way to do it, but that depends on which way your fish is facing, but that's preferable. If you have to do it the other way, then just be careful that when you're pulling the mesh out, you don't lift or bend any of the fins. The rig should be extracted at this point if it is still in place. Again, I like to make sure that's done a lot earlier, but that's down to you and your experience. Remove the rig, treat the fish if it needs treating, wherever it needs treating on its body. And then you're at this stage now where your fish is already in a wet, pre-zeroed weigh sling. I'm pretty sure I did say make sure your sling is wet before you zeroed it. Yes, I did. So that's all taken into account. The fish is in the sling. All you need to do is zip it up, make sure its fins are flat to its body, and we're going to weigh the fish and get a good accurate recording of what that fish weighed for our record, should we wish to do so. It's not mandatory to weigh a fish. I don't weigh all of my fish, but if you want to weigh them, this is how you do it properly. If you are using dial scales, you know, if you're using scales like this, which is the style that I tend to prefer, don't cup them underneath. You see a lot of people weighing fish like that. That will give you a vastly inflated reading of the actual weight of the fish. The only way that these scales work is by suspending from the top and letting the fish take its weight up on the hook at the bottom. Now obviously with bigger fish that can be a bit tricky because it's a small point to hold on to, so a weigh bar or a tripod system or whatever you prefer can really assist in that process. But again, don't weigh them like that. Having done that, it's quite a lengthy process. It's all done in 3 or 4 minutes, but there's a lot to cover. Lay the fish back down gently and you're ready to do the pictures. At this point we unzip the sling, we expose the fish, we have a nice look at it, we give it a wash down with the bucket of water. Always wash down the side that's going up to the camera. Again, that's something else that you see a lot of people do wrong. And the way to remember that is when the fish is lying flat on the mat, its dorsal fin, its back, should be nearest to you and your kneeling knees. You wash that flank, and then when you lift it, it's ready to go. Give it a good wash down, as I said, and then it's a matter of holding the fish in a manner that is comfortable for you and secure to the fish. I don't favour really high and I don't favour really out, trying to distort the picture. Not only does it distort the picture, but it doesn't look great, guys. Let's be honest. Telescopic Go Gadget arms. Who are you trying to kid, you know? But more importantly, it's not great for the carp because once you're extended out like that, you're well off balance. If that fish kicks or flips, you could find yourself with a whole load of problems. So I like to keep the fish close to my body. I don't like to lift it particularly high, and always keep it over the mat at every time, every moment of this whole process. So your pictures will be done either by doing self-takes yourself, or hopefully you've got a mate to help you out, do a few pictures. You can lay the fish down if you want to, turn the mat round and do the other side. Before you do, wash that side off, lift it up. Try and, it comes with experience, but try and make sure that the flank of the fish is parallel to the camera rather than sloping where the fish is leaning back towards you. Some people like to put a couple of fingers around the anal fin to get a grip on it. It's not something I like to do, but probably doesn't do any harm to the fish. So if that helps you hold on to the fish, then give that a go. The other hand goes underneath the chin, and it's really largely down to practice. The thing you've got to be aware of is that that fish could kick or flip at any time. Luckily, we usually get a little precursor warning to that. You'll feel the fish tense up or tremble, or you might see the tail. Usually the tail will start moving where the top flukes are moving in an opposite direction to the bottom flukes. That means that something's usually about to happen. If you sense anything's about to happen, or if indeed it does happen, get the fish down quickly and cover it with your body. Keep it. Your responsibility is that carp. It mustn't get off the mat. You've got to try and keep it under control. Don't be afraid of it. A lot of people, when a fish kicks, they feel they want to back away from it. The opposite. You've got to get in there, make sure that that fish is safe. Usually I'll put the sling back over the top of it and keep it in a dark environment for 5 or 10 seconds till it's calmed down, and then you're ready to go again. So, everything should have been done nice and smoothly. Some situations can be more fraught than others. Sometimes fish can be an absolute nightmare on the bank, and sometimes I just give up with them and I just get them back in the water if they won't sit still. But you know, those situations are rare. Usually it's a lot smoother than that. When the job's done, it's a matter of making sure the fish is laying in the bottom of the sling, fins are all flat to its body, zip the sling back up and carry it carefully back to the water. If you're carrying it over any staging, any poles or anything that's sticking up, be very careful you don't bash the fish into that. A lot of this is common sense, guys, but they're things that I have seen happen in the past. Carry the fish down to the water. Again, I like to get in the water if I can, but if there's nice deep water off the front of the swim, then I'll just lay on my stomach and unzip the sling and then open the sling out until the fish is ready to leave you. Never be in a hurry to push the fish off or get it back. Just let it circulate the water back through its gills. Remember, you've had it out of the water for maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes, and it will need to recover and get that oxygen flowing back through its blood again. So wait until the fish is ready. Hold it upright if it needs to be. Very rare that happens, but if it is listing to one side, just hold it so it's the right way up. And in a very short space of time, if it's a healthy fish, it will go of its own accord. And that is job done. The very, very most important fundamentals video that we've done, as I said right at the top of this piece, making sure that those fish go back in at least as good a condition as when we hooked them. Everything's taken into account for, we've treated any wounds, and we've got a good memory and hopefully a recording of that fish in good quality photographs and a weight to be proud of. You know, sometimes the fish aren't big, sometimes small, sometimes they might be singles or doubles, but they all need to be treated with the same amount of respect as those big ones, because those smaller fish will all be monsters, hopefully, in their own right one day. It is worth mentioning, guys, that fish do pick up injuries just going about their normal life through spawning and so on. If you ever get a fish that you're uncomfortable with in any way because it might have some inordinate damage, split fins, it could be anything really, or maybe it's just behaving in an odd manner, then just slip it back into a retainer and contact the fishery officer straight away so that they can assess it for themselves. Very, very rare indeed. We've got a load of geese going overhead. It's autumn, they're all flying out west now. It's a sign of the seasons. But really hope you've enjoyed watching this Fundamentals carp fishing episode in conjunction with JRC. The very most important one that we've done. Take the information, put it into your fishing, make sure you've covered all of those bases. I think we've pretty much done it here, and make sure those carp go back in pristine condition. Thank you very much for watching. We look forward to seeing you again soon.